They're fast, they're sleek, and they can smell prey from 2 miles away. It's no wonder we're so fascinated by sharks, but despite our keen interest, there's a lot we don't know about these predators. Scientists just recently learned great whites can live up to 70 years, and the way they made that discovery is equally fascinating. Joining us, as she does most Thursdays, is WGBH science editor Heather Goldstone, who holds a PhD in ocean science. Welcome back, Heather.
Good to be here.
All right, so why does it matter that we now know sharks can live up to 70 years?
Well, there are some repercussions for conservation and management of shark populations. So if sharks mature at 10 or 15 years old and live to be 30 or 40 years old and reproduce every year and a half in between there, you can figure out about how many baby sharks you'd get and how long it might take a population that's been overfished to recover. If they mature at 10 or 15 years and do that until they're 70, obviously you're going to get a population that's growing much more quickly. But if they don't mature until they're 30 or 40 years old and then reproduce until they're 70, then a population is going to grow much, much more slowly. And they don't actually know which of those scenarios is the real one.
Okay, so how did scientists actually figure out that they can live this long?
Well, so we've all seen footage like this. There's thermonuclear bomb testing in the 50s into the early 60s. What does that have to do with sharks? Well, the radiation from those tests went into the atmosphere, then into the ocean, and then started making its way into the ocean food chain and into the bodies of animals like sharks.
So how do they actually measure it in sharks' bodies?
Well, what they decided to do in this case is that it got incorporated actually into their bones, into their vertebrae. And traditionally, the way that the ages of sharks have been measured is kind of like counting tree rings, that you can count growth rings in the vertebrae of sharks. So there's actually an image in the paper that was just published, this new study. I think we can see that. And you can see when they cut into the vertebrae, it's not a tooth, it's actually the vertebrae. When they cut into it, it's triangular shaped like this, and you can see those lines. Well, those are actually the growth rings. And so what they did in this study is they actually sliced these vertebrae apart into different pieces, tested for the amount of radioactivity in each of those, and basically used that to find which rings would have been formed in the 50s or 60s during this testing. And then they could count backward from the time when the shark died to say, okay, well, was that, if the shark died this year, then that should have been about 50 years ago. Do we see 50 growth rings in between there? Are these rings being laid down annually, or are they being laid down more slowly?
And they could tell.
Yeah, and they could tell, and it turns out that early in their life, kind of the way we grow really rapidly until we're adults and then we slow down, that the sharks seem to be laying down a growth ring every year early in life, and then they slow way down. And because they'd been still counting them as yearly rings, that we were really underestimating how old these sharks were.
Assuming this nuclear waste is going to dissipate at some point, are they going to get what Fukushima is going to be the new test ground? How are they going to be able to measure it going forward?
There are things that we can learn from these radioactive events, and in fact we can learn basics about how ocean circulation works, and it starts to work its way into the food chain, and we can start to learn other things about how the biology of the ocean works as well.
All right. So do we know how many there are in the ocean? Do we have any idea?
How many sharks?
Yeah. Great whites?
We definitely, no, we don't have a solid count that I know of.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Heather.